America is becoming more and more dangerous over the years. According to North Carolinians Against Gun Violence (NCGB), 2018 alone, there were 340 mass shootings in the United States. This is bad enough as is, but is made worse when we consider the impact it has had on youth as well. Death by gunshot is rated the second highest cause of death for children between the ages of 1 through 19, and the US has led the world in the highest rate of youth firearm deaths for quite a couple of years. As such, the issue I sought to raise awareness on was the surprisingly high level of youth gun violence that exists in North Carolina. I believe for this, the community of learners for this project is likely to be the peers in this course, as I cannot really determine any other group who may be fit for the definition of the term that I was able to find. We all seem to come from a number of different backgrounds, ethnicities, and even races, which helps display differences in culture and family values affecting us all, as well as different views from society. Most, if not all, of us also appear to be the age of 18 or under, which makes it all relevant to the issue of youth violence, as we are within that range of being affected. Most of us also attend A&T, which would place us obviously in North Carolina. Determining the group being a target was also somewhat difficult, but I believe a potential could be racial minorities. And with this, I believe positionality is mostly influenced by one's race, social class, as well as developmental upbringing, which I describe as having both parents in your life as a proper role model, or at least having a proper family role model. Politics, especially in relation to different parties' attitudes towards certain gun laws, some of which may be considered racist, may also be somewhat an influence if anyone is active in politics, which may affect how they view the treatment of the issue. In this project, I also wanted to address the relatively ineffective measures taken so far to prevent such levels of violence. This is especially important when considering that, just like the United States, the second highest cause of death of children and teens is gun violence in North Carolina. This rising rate is correlated to an overall decline in the rankings of gun rights. According to the Fayetteville Observer, North Carolina was once considered a golden standard for gun rights, yet has since dropped to 35th in state ranking. They say this is a result of the continued usage of a Jim Crow era pistol purchase law, which was made to prevent African Americans from getting guns. The only attempts at repealing this law were made in 2021, yet were immediately repealed by Governor Roy Cooper. This is where the connection to politics influencing bias is coming from. With African Americans, however, composing a large piece of the population in many North Carolinian cities, this law renders them defenseless, especially amid the rising levels of violent crime. Such restrictions that serve no benefit go to show that some of the disproportional effects that gun violence has on North Carolinians of different races, down to a basic effect of defense. Discrepancies also exist among the youth, as according to everytownresearch.org, black teens and children are 3 times as likely to die from guns as their white peers. With such statistics and figures, it would seem that most patterns of youth gun violence are a result of racial discrimination, wouldn't it? After all, many viewing this as a problem of rights and lack of defense, the sentiment must be true, right? Well, as I found out, there may be something far greater involved. Now, beyond basic research, like the preliminary research that I've just brought up, I also interviewed a police officer as well as a friend who had a gun pulled on them during work quite recently. I also plan to interview a representative from the organization North Carolinians Against Gun Violence, as well as interview someone from the psychology department here on A&T campus. But unfortunately, neither of those two outlets got back in contact with me, and thus they had to be scrapped. Going into these interviews, I was expecting to hear common trends about the role of racism or racial discrepancies in gun violence. After all, almost all sources, media, and organizations seem to point to unjust racial laws or ones that were racially discriminating as the primary point of origin for all these issues in the first place. I also expected to hear more about general trends of gun violence as opposed to those occurring in children, because honestly, you normally see shootings from adults or at least people who are older than 21. After finding out also about the actions of websites like 4chan, who have been responsible for numerous accounts of terrorism, as well as even being responsible for a shooting in Buffalo, New York, I also expected to see more of an emphasis on malicious, harmful online groups manipulating others into developing poor mindsets. However, in spite of all these expectations, I would find myself surprised. I received an account of an incident involving one of my friends who had a gun pulled on them during work. I received this account at around April 5th at around 10 a.m. Admittedly, there wasn't much that I ended up using with this account, other than having the realization that anyone can be in danger at any time, no matter how old you are. Potentially what occurred during an accident was that there was an extremely irritable customer at late at night who claimed that their order was missing items that they never even placed. After being repeatedly being corrected, the customer, who appeared to be in their late 20s, pulled a gun on her and her coworkers, who were all 16 or 17 years old. The man, after being forced out of the restaurant due to an emergency closing, remained in the parking lot waiting for anyone to leave the restaurant for about 3 hours before he was eventually scared off by someone who pulled into the drive-thru. The worst part of this case is that this person was never caught, meaning a dangerous individual may still very much be loose in the general area. Due to the event occurring pretty recently, I'm not really able to determine long-term effects on the mental state of the workers, which is rather unfortunate. Regardless, this helped emphasize the notion that a crime like this doesn't necessarily require rhyme or reason to it at all. It could really occur at any time or place. The man also appeared to be in a delirious kind of mental state, so it also stressed to me the dangers of mentally unwell people possessing firearms. Other than these general conclusions, I didn't really get much from this report. Fortunately, the interview I had with the police officer in a somewhat nearby city proved to be far more valuable. I interviewed Officer Ala Alzer, patrols in Rocky Mount. He has been an officer for 20 plus years and has remained in the Rocky Mount area for all that time. Given this, he appears to be more than qualified in describing trends of gun violence within that area. The full interview lasted about 26 minutes and occurred at 6:21 p.m. on April 5th. This interview was conducted via phone call. Due to the extreme length of it, I will just be summarizing some major points that I got at the end of it and some larger conclusions I was able to make. Throughout the interview, I would come to find out that most of the gun violence cases he receives involve youth instead of adults, and it is an almost daily issue. This immediately went against one of my biggest expectations, which I thought wouldn't be a big issue for really any area, which was really surprising. And I also learned that yes, as I thought, social media is indeed a danger and major contributor to housing and kind of spurring youth gun violence. But it alone is not what makes people prone to violent acts. A lack of morals, a lack of sense of consequences. All of this sort of contributes to this problem. Simply being surrounded by dangerous groups will not turn these youth to violence, but rather is exacerbated by an already existing mindset that does not differentiate right from wrong, or has not been disciplined to do so. I learned that while race may indeed be disproportionately impacted by gun violence, more often than not is the circumstances of one's upbringing that truly contributes to this behavior. This all changes with the change in motives for these kinds of acts of gun violence being more about, and these youth, more about aim and proving oneself, as opposed to malicious intent. As stated by the officer himself, the younger generation is more concerned about public image than they are about doing what is right. And with the world that's more connected than ever, causing people to be able to see much wider audiences with the click of a button, this mindset is all the more dangerous. And as he describes it, all it is about disrespect. With blank said this about this person, and blank messed with my girl, and so on. It's as if these people view committing these crimes as a way of showing that they're tough, that they're not a wimp, and as if that's something desirable. That's for people who resort to desperate actions to get what they want. This generation is no different in their desire for attention. It's funny how a common online insult is to say that someone lacks a father figure, or that they have no father. But maybe there is much more to this sentiment than is often given thought. After all, African Americans and other racial minorities are more prone to being brought up in single parent households. In fact, 67% of African American children in the US are born into single parent households. And overall, this generation has seen a much larger rise in the amount of households that are consist of a single parent, single mother, single father, who are either teen parents or and end up only having one of them involved. Often, those committing gun crimes come from dysfunctional, problematic households where they do not get the proper and necessary discipline and role modeling that they need while growing up. The opposites are made out of this too, saying that many children can get away with being disrespectful as they are not taught that there are consequences to one's actions. That he even emphasized how most of these cases he sees involves youth from single-parent families that are low income, which implies that something is going on that is messing with their growth. Interestingly, most other organizations I ever saw seem to be focusing on strictly regulating gun laws. NCGV followed this trend. Same could be said for many news outlets, focusing on the racial laws, racist gun laws that they needed to be changed to fix the issue. This also pertains to the importance of social media too. Most assume that both of these things are just inherently dangerous, that there's nothing except that these are the definitive reasons that this sorts of crime happens. But it fails to consider what motivates this generation to commit these violent deeds in the first place. Sure, there may be chat boards directly involved with gun violence and shooting, like 4chan, Instagram, or Snapchat, ones that people can connect in the worst ways possible. However, their existence alone is not what is responsible for the problem. And even the officer himself mentions that changing gun laws will do nothing to resolve this issue, just as trying to restrict social media access will. Because just because the two of them, you may try to counteract them, but they're still going to exist anyway. And as such, taking a non direct approach will not do anything. Really, what I learned was all these parts of the problem, whether they relate to a rise in access and advancement of technology, to racial discrepancies, and even the income level of the household, all of them sort of lock into a place as progression to creating the problem. Yes, there are laws inhibiting the rights of minorities that are indeed a part of this problem. However, it does not create the issue in the first place. This, funnily enough, is reflective of the interdisciplinary process as a whole. You cannot simply attribute the problem to simply being a result of dangerous online groups or racism. How you can pull certain ideas and statistics from each of these blames to form a fuller understanding. All of these aspects, despite their differences, do share underlying similarities and connections that piece them together into a bigger whole. You cannot expect to understand it all simply for viewing one of these, just as you cannot view a single discipline to properly understand a complex problem. Only by considering all potential variables can a proper understanding be achieved and the road to a proper solution begin. This is where I believe most of the faults of organizations focused on only gun laws lie. Sure, ensuring the gun rights of minorities may achieve better equality for all, but in the end, this does nothing to actually stop youth from shooting other people. It's more of a surface level analysis that African Americans are victims more than white people are, and then concluding and assuming this is just a result of racist laws. So, really, interestingly, I was able to see a potential solution to all of this that didn't necessarily relate to guns at all. Rather than making stricter gun laws or preventing social media access or some other thing like that, it seems more appropriate to instead shift to the way we treat youth offenders as well as those who like youth who have not grown up with the proper role model. The officer I interviewed makes a really good point, in that there is no real punishment to being sent to juvie. It doesn't prevent one from going to college, getting a job, really having a future. In fact, it doesn't even apply to a real track record when you're an adult. In his own words, he describes it as just being more akin to getting a slap on the wrist and being let go. With an already established lack of discipline from this generation, having no repercussions to any actions will likely not change a youth into thinking that they do not need to commit these acts again, and they are likely to repeat this behavior. Should not be surprised as a result that this has in fact happened. And he's seen repeated offenders go in and out of juvie without ever changing, committing the same exact crimes, going back in, going in and out, because they never learned what to do. These people know full well that nothing in the grand scheme of things will truly go wrong if they're arrested, has led to them developing a lack of respect for the law and a lack of fear or intuition telling them that they shouldn't do it. For adults, in contrast, going to jail is a permanent stain on one's future. There is a pure risk and danger of committing a crime, one that is potentially impossible to recover from. Your jobs, how society views you, who will even consider you weighing your track record. All this is at risk. And that is what really makes people want to be more sly with it. Another behavior that he noted how children were more showy with their acts of gun violence, while adults, they don't want to be caught. This is probably the connection to why. Because for children and youth, this danger is relatively non existent. Nothing really bad's going to happen if they get caught, or if they do it, so why stop? This is where the problem really lies. The experience also helped to emphasize me the importance of considering all perspectives to a problem. They are able to help reveal the flaws of one another and overall find the similarities and differences that exist between them. This enables me to develop a wider understanding, which I did. Something that would have been impossible if I ignored points made by different perspectives. For instance, had I only regarded youth gun violence as an issue of racial violence, I would not have been able to recognize the greater significance that circumstances of upbringing have. Similarly, only considering these sorts of circumstances would ignore the disproportionate rates that different ethnicities face, which would dull my understanding of the issue and properly understanding who is commonly impacted. Only by considering all of these am I able to prevent tunnel vision and not develop gaps in my insight. It's also kind of obvious to see how this issue reproduces inequality. It appears that youth gun violence affects different races and income levels quite differently, with an explicitly high prominence in low income households, which are commonly linked to racial minorities. Such households are also typically characteristic of single parent households. So, really, the issue is not a matter of race, rather, it is a circumstance of how they are brought up, which just so happens to be a common thing among minorities. So these children who are only have a single parent or do not have a good role model, they are likely to be more effective. And while this still may occur in higher income or proper disciplining homes, where where parents are actively involved in making sure and disciplining and really nurturing their own children, it's not nearly as much of a problem, or not nearly as prevalent. And with the steady rise of these single parent households in this younger generation, this rise in gun violence, it makes all the more sense. While I was not able to find a definitive frequent location for where youth gun violence most commonly occurs, it does seem to occur in areas where there are low income households, as well as single parent families. Strangely enough, through all the local sources that are knowledgeable about this topic, none of them that I found offered a solution for preventing gun violence. Sure, there's statistics about the unequal gun rights and high rates of gun violence from NCGB, who also claim that it was a matter of racial injustice. The general laws and regulations of firearm possession in North Carolina that I found from Kirk Law, and general PSAs and posters about proper gun storage that I found from the officer that is also across a lot of these sources. Nothing else really existed, however. I guess you could say that your local police department would be giving you the most valuable, informative information, but other than this, they don't really offer much of a solution. The most I can say is even being done to address this issue is just emphasizing gun storage, proper gun storage, and rallying for better gun rights. It's about more of it might help rather than an actual call to action that is done to do effect. And as such, I cannot really say that really too much is being done to prevent this issue. And if so, is being done in all the wrong ways. Anyways, that's what I got from this action project. And I kind of apologize for the length, but thank you.